Reason. We're actually missing Father Charles Murr this week, and Liz Yor, of course. Liz can't be with us for a little while, but Father Charles is experiencing some health matters. He's got a fever and stuff. You could pray for him. I'm sure he'd appreciate it. We have with us Father Chris Alar from the Marian Fathers, who is joining us, as well as Frank Wright. Stay tuned. We've got quite the show. We've got Elon Musk warning about the end of the world. We've got Kanye West and his decision to start a porn company. We've also got news of it really does appear the Biden DOJ is torturing the pro-life prisoners that they've got in there. All that and much more on this episode of Faith and Reason. Stay tuned. Father Chris, thanks so much for joining us. It was a late invite, so thank you.
Thank you.
And Frank, good to be with you again. Father, if you don't mind leading us off, please, with a prayer.
Yes, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
St. Joseph, on this day, we commemorate the worker and turn to you as the example of laboring in the vineyard of God, that you guide us, bless us, and protect us, and open the minds and hearts of your faithful to receive the truth that is given through your word, and through those faithful Catholics to be dedicated to spreading this word and to be open to living the truth. And we ask all this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. So, my friends, one of the things that we saw that is totally startling this week is the exclusive stories at LifeSiteNews.com about what's happening to the prisoners, the pro-life prisoners, who are serving time right now. They're getting sentenced. They're awaiting sentence, some of them. But the treatment is just unbelievable.
Yeah.
So here is the testimony from LifeSite reporter Louis Kanufke, who's been on this story. A friend of jailed pro-lifer Heather Idoni and a co-defendant in the Michigan FACE Act trial told LifeSite News that U.S. Marshals paraded Idoni in full shackles into federal court as if the mother of 5 and an adoptive mother of 10, so it's 15 altogether, was a dangerous criminal, to the shock of those who were present, including the judge. Calvin Zastro is the one who gave us the testimony. He's been charged, along with Idoni, of violating the pro-abortion FACE, the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, in a Michigan case for participating in a traditional pro-life rescue. He told LifeSite News in our interview that he witnessed Idoni marched into the federal court with shackles around her wrists, her waist, and feet in a humiliation ordinarily reserved for perpetrators of violent crime. Zastro said that far from deserving such harsh treatment, Idoni and her husband have heroically adopted 10 boys from the Ukraine, in addition to the 5 children they already had. He affirmed that Idoni is a devout Christian, a woman of very strong faith, and the quote from him is, quote, a very loving mother, grandmother, and friend. He said she is loved and missed by her family and friends who are praying for her daily during her imprisonment for defending the unborn. Idoni herself told LifeSite News that her faith has sustained her during her time behind bars and that she tries to witness to Christ even in prison. She said, and I quote, that the Lord has never has never not felt his presence, so that she has never not felt the Lord's presence. And she characterized her 8 months of incarceration, as immersion prison ministry. She's also a defendant in another case as well. She told us that she had 22 days of solitary confinement in which she was let out like couple or 3 or 4 hours a day only, usually in the middle of the night, so she had no contact with people. And during that 22 hours, the lights were left on constantly. So this really does, I mean, I don't know what the official definitions of torture are, but gosh, this sounds harsh for a grandmother. And we have other prisoners receiving similar, just deplorable treatment. Frank, what's your take on this?
Well, I understand that she was incarcerated and treated like this because of the freedom to access clinical entrances, which I think is I suppose, a provision in the law to allow people to destroy the lives of their unborn children without being disturbed by people who are concerned with preserving them. When we put it into that context, you can see the profound moral inversion that is at work here. That it seems to be, it's not just demonstrated through the deliberate humiliation and, if you like, torture of people who will stand up against this, but it also exemplifies what the full force of the law is exercised to do. And what it's upholding here, which is described as a right, is effectively destroying the rights of people who are seeking to protect the fundamental right of all, which is the right to life and the essential value of human life. It is a demonstration of power. It is an attempt to humiliate people, but it must be remembered that it is done so in the service of a legal system that now is empowered by a profound moral inversion, where the most serious vice is defended as the highest legal virtue.
Hmm. Father, in the beginning, it was all thought, you have your way, I'll have mine, and everybody's going to be calm and peaceful. This is showing a brutality that's truly stunning. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's not just this isolated event. Remember back, was it in December of last year? And God bless Senator Josh out of Missouri, Hawley, that brought back that report or brought up that report. The House subcommittee really focused on weaponization by the federal government on the power of the government used to target and to intimidate, harass specifically Catholics,
Mm.
pro-life activists. The report found that the FBI abused this counterterrorism tools that they were supposed to be using in different capacities to target Americans solely based on the fact that they were Catholic and calling them potential domestic terrorists. So this whole Richmond, Virginia memo that came out basically was referring to traditional Catholics as being, if I remember correctly, uh, extremists, violent extremists. And so the FBI relied on this to label Catholics as violent extremists. I mean, that's the course that we're taking. Instead of running down criminal gangs or drug cartels, the FBI is targeting Catholics purely based on their faith and belief in pro-life. It's preposterous, and now it's being even manifested and not just being watched or tracked or analyzed, but now being outright, as your story on LifeSite indicates, tortured and abused. This is a violation of every right that they have.
So, isn't this stunning? Remember the case that came out in Josh's analysis, Josh Hawley's analysis, also was Mark Houck, and what they did to that poor family with 7 kids and little
Yeah, in
kids, and
Tennessee. Yeah.
craziness. But isn't it
Yeah,
funny?
they said,
We've
Josh said that, Senator Hawley said that they came in not just present, coming to the door, but they came in with shields, masks, guns, causing more disruption to this poor family. I mean, this is everything that our country was not founded on, and our country was founded on the ability to be protected by our government, not just harassed, but outright now tortured and abused. This is beyond any scope of what you will even begin to believe is possible in our nation today.
and it's stunning because when people talked about times that are coming, that we'd come to a time when Catholics would be persecuted, and they might be arrested and maybe even killed again. people always wondered, how could, come on, really? Can we really get there? No, we're all civilized now. Yeah, abortion. That's something else. But all of a sudden it's here. How did we
Hmm.
get to this state from people thinking, no, no, it's live and let live. You do yours, I'll do mine. We'll all be good. No, it's not. It's just absolutely unbelievable. So we're watching this play out. I would urge people to please keep these pro-lifers in jail in your prayers, because they definitely need prayers, but also they're going to use the grace from those prayers, because they are doing an active prison ministry when they're not in solitary, but they're doing an active prison ministry and bringing many people to the Lord. And also to pro-life. So it's really beautiful what's happening on the inside during the persecution. It is very much a persecution. Let's not get that wrong, but they're doing good things nonetheless. We have something that happened though that's quite disturbing last week. We watched the progression of Kanye West. And way back in 2013, Kanye was an abortion advocate. He was as left could be. In 2018, it was very interesting. He started listening to Jordan Peterson, of all people.
Hmm.
And Jordan Peterson it was regarded as a threat to the left that Kanye mentioned that he was listening to him. Kanye then went through something of a revolution. You'll remember he dedicated an album to Jesus. He actually came out as pro-life. He got stronger and stronger in that, and he talked even about how Planned Parenthood is basically doing Black genocide. He went so far as to um, appear in a White Lives Matter uh, hoodie or shirt. And on the front of that, you can see on the screen here, was Pope John Paul II. Absolutely beautiful. In fact, on the 32nd episode of this show, at that time, we wondered if Kanye might think about becoming a Catholic, since he was wearing that shirt, as the one he was wearing at work, Candace Owens, has done so. But Kanye also at the time was he gave an interview with Tucker Carlson. I just want to play this now, just so that you can see how good he was. In fact, watch this.
I don't care about people's responses. I care about the fact that there's more Black babies being aborted than born in New York City at this point. That 50% of Black death in America is abortion.
So, I mean, he was taking it very seriously. He got to a really good place. There was a lot of hope and hopefully a lot of prayer for him at the time, but something's happened. Something's happened that's been very, very strange indeed. We heard just this week that he is starting a pornography company called Yezi Porn. And I want you to let you know what a revolution this is. And here's why. So, as he was having this conversion, as he was coming around in his life, here's what he said in 2019. He confessed that he had been addicted to porn for 37 years and that porn had shaped his entire life. And this is a quote from him. Playboy was my gateway into full-on porn addiction. My dad had a Playboy left out at age 5, and it's affected almost every choice I made for the rest of my life. From age 5 till now, having to kick the habit, and it just presents itself in the open like it's okay. And I stand up and say, no, it's not okay. He revealed also that he had problems with his relationships because of this. So he's now totally fallen off the boat. Father, I wanted to ask you, I mean, this is so sad to see. And it's going to cause all sorts of consternation. And we know we could see his life unraveling with the strangeness of his wife's dress and the new wife's dress or whatever. But Father, your take on these things, and how do people go from one side to the other like that?
Well, I think knowing a little bit about the story, and yes, that first thing that shocked me in hearing this latest news was what you just read, in regarding his proclaiming the dangers of pornography and objectification of women, and anybody really in the porn industry. He made it clear that it destroyed his family prior to being married through his father and the marriage of his parents. He made it clear of the dangers and the effect it had on him and his relationships. And I'll be honest with you, I believe him. I believe he meant what he said at the
Mhm.
time. When I listened to his interviews and read his statements, it seemed very believable. I'm going to still hold to that, but here's the problem. We have to understand that as much as we love conversion stories and instantaneous graces that can change our lives, Father Don Calloway, my brother in Christ here at the Marian Fathers, is a great example. But he is the first to tell you it just isn't that easy. You have to portray, or I should say, acknowledge the reality that it's not just a spiritual battle, it can get into our psychology. If you have been affected or addicted, and you have been deeply entwined in alcoholism, pornography, sexual addiction, yes, the conversion is critical and God's grace overcomes. But we also have to do our part, such as seeking counseling. We have to get to the psychological root of these problems. We are humans. We're not just soul, we're not just body, we are soul body composite. And what that means is that we have to take care of both the spiritual side as well as the psychology of our makeup. And I think from reading what happened, I believe he had a moment of grace, a realization of the evils, but he continued a lifestyle that was more conducive to his former way. Eventually, it's going to come back.
Mm.
You can't be a drug addict or an alcoholic and continue to have the bottle around and just sipping a little taste at a time. It's
Mm.
going to come back, and the spiritual side is first and foremost, but we have to follow it up with the psychiatric side, getting counseling, getting treatment, knowing how it affected our brain, physiology of the matter. This is something that we as Catholics sometimes go to the only spiritual side, and we seem to forget about the humanity side of it as well. It takes both. With God's grace, we can overcome, but it does take both. And I think he just slipped back into that lifestyle. I believed what he said, but now you look at it and it's easy to say he left the door open and
Mm.
those demons came back.
Indeed. Indeed. Frank, your take.
Well, given the immense power that celebrities have, whether they're kind of entertainment celebrities or sports celebrities or any kind of people in the public eye, to influence public behavior, it's important to question why these people's behaviors become normative and why they might change for reasons other than their own personal autonomy. I mean, I think that it's become, unfortunately, quite obvious in certain celebrity crises in the past few years that many of these people don't really have the power to direct their own lives, and they have, if they like, a kind of management of their own personal and public affairs to do so. Now, it may seem paranoid to suggest that people who are perpetually in the public eye do have handlers in order to direct them towards certain agendas and away from others. But it's important to remember that for 100 years, our liberal democracy has been, according to the efforts of people like Walter Lippmann and the Council on Foreign Relations, effectively managed by a group of elites who determine what kind of issues that we're going to believe in as democratic and as correct and as right, which is effectively a form of kind of undeclared warfare upon the public mind. Lippmann himself said the public was the problem to be solved. And the way that you solve this is by controlling what people believe, by forming what he called public opinion. And he wrote a book in 1922 about that. So I would say it's important to remember that the role of celebrities is very much akin to the idea of bread and circuses. And it's noteworthy that Kanye West, who has immense cultural power, regardless of whether you actually like him or his music, he's very influential. It's significant that having had this moment, as it were, where he approached some kind of conversion to the truth, that he's rowed back into a more, shall we say, culturally fitting position, one that sits much more easily with the kind of hypersexualized consumer managerialism that we're told is normal. And of course, his behavior will now help to normalize that, just as his own father's behavior normalized the presence of pornography in his life and shaped his future attitudes.
Mhm. Father, one thing I wanted to do is just mention, because you mentioned about how people sometimes need psychological help and so on. It's very, very important, wouldn't you say, that they get good counselors who are Catholic, who have
Ah,
a right directed line on seeing these things.
thank you for stating that. That was going to be my next comment. Just because you're seeking mental health treatment or counseling doesn't mean it's going to help you. There is such a shortage of solid counselors, therapists that teach or even embrace in any way a solid Catholic doctrine and teaching. We have a situation now where it's almost a crisis because even psychologists who profess themselves to be Catholic, when you speak with them, I've done several research projects on this matter for my suicide book, which I drafted about 5 years ago. And speaking with psychologists on the matter, I was shocked to learn that they state Catholic, being Catholic, but when you talk to them, they do not have any foundation in Catholic teaching, and this is not just not helpful to the victims; it's dangerous because they're being taught things contrary to the teaching of the Church, and this is very scary. And what's happening. So yes, thank you for pointing that out.
Great. Yeah. One of the things it hit home very much for me because one of my own relatives, cousin of mine in Europe, and this is already over a decade ago. I mean, the therapy for overcoming some difficulties that he was having was actually to look at pornography and
Yeah,
and self-abuse. So
yeah. Another
just
one that
so
told
far
me
off the
during my
page.
investigation I was linking depression and anxiety with suicide, and they recommend strongly masturbation.
Yeah.
That that leads you to a release of the stresses, the anxieties. So they were teaching heavily on the therapy of masturbation to relieve anxiety and depression, which will then prevent suicides. This is how misdirected, and this person was deemed a Catholic counselor. Very scary.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the 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 gravity of that danger is so severe because when you associate self-abuse masturbation with things you form very powerful addictions, and it is such a danger that's apart from the danger to your soul, because of course that activity is mortal sin. It's so that's why encouraged some people to look at catholictherapists.com, uh, but be very, very cautious, assess where they're at, because when you entrust yourself to someone as a therapist, it's a very you're vulnerable that way, and you need to know
And
that you're
and
being
and you
taken
you
care
hit
of.
it, John Henry. The key is what they are not factoring in is the additional addictions that this behavior is forming, and
Mhm.
you're putting people into not only just a serious situation as they were before, but in some cases worse. And so they're not factoring in the spiritual side when they are counseling these individuals.
Indeed, indeed. The knowledge or the impressions of the world are so skewed that they're upside down, and
Yes.
eventually they become to be at least in some people's minds they get seen, and such is the case with Elon Musk this week. He's been talking a while uh, about the need for to get out of the concept of we need to reduce the population, because he sees the real stats which indicate we're in a population bust. In fact, he just tweeted out something this week. It says, if birth rates continue to plummet, human civilization will end. And then he links to a clip from a NatCon conference. Listen to this.
Will your children have children of their own? It doesn't matter if you already have kids, if you don't have kids, if you hate kids. If you have a 401k or a mortgage or a social security card or a checking account, this question is going to impact your life in a very direct way. The entire global financial system The value of your money and almost every asset you might buy with money is defined by leverage, which means its value is dependent on growth. Every country in the developed world and most countries in the developing world face long-term population decline at a scale that makes that growth impossible to maintain, which means we are sitting on the bubble of all bubbles. Not just a temporary overheating of home construction, but a permanent oversupply, like kind you find in cities like Detroit. Not just tech stocks, but the entire equities market. Not just a handful of cities gutted of their tax base and going bankrupt, but thousands of them, and then sovereign bankruptcies. It's an everything bubble. Even so, you may say, well, it's a bubble. So be it. If it pops, then there's a correction and we move on. But in the aftermath of a collapse like this, the shrinking number of productive workers have to support a growing number of older, sicker people, which in turn accelerates the economic pressures that make it difficult to start families. This problem isn't self-correcting, at least not within your lifetime. It gets worse as it gets worse.
All right, Frank, you want to unpack some of that for us?
Yeah, it's an extremely sobering and doom-laden prognosis, and one which I think is borne out by major macroeconomic events and things such as the Chinese and Japanese government refusing to buy any further US government bonds because their debt's actually useless and they can't trust the US government's guarantees to buy this in order to make it an investment. We are facing at some point, if you like, a major economic correction or a crash. Having said that, it is possible to do things. Politics can do things if there's a political will. If you look at Hungary, where they've abolished income tax for people who have more than, I think, 4 children for a lifetime. That's it. And Hungary is, although it hasn't returned to 1970s birth rate, Hungary is the only developed country in the world that has reversed the vertiginous decline in the TFR, or the number of babies born to every woman in society. So Hungary shows that you can do it if the political will is there. I mean, one thing that's good about Musk's statement that if we don't reverse the decline in births, civilization will end, is that it simplifies the issue. I mean, he's right. There isn't any future without a human future, obviously. Another thing to point out is that where the political will is there, this can change. So the obvious conclusion is that the political will lies in the destruction of the birth rate for whatever reasons they have, but it's certainly something that isn't taking place in the absence of political action. It's the result of political action, and we know what those actions are, and it could change, and so far it won't. But I certainly think that this is simply one aspect of the politics of insanity and national suicide that is going to see a sharp correction ensue. Because, as I said, I am consistently guilty of the the treason of optimism.
Father, your take.
Well, I mean, we go all the way back, with the eugenics, Margaret Sanger and Hitler. But then it became, what was it, the 60s or 70s, Paul Ehrlich's book, Population Bomb. It was used as an excuse for everything from birth control to abortion, then to China's one-child policy. But what wasn't factored into that was the problems caused by population decline. As we just mentioned, declining population leads to a lot of international instability. As just mentioned, as countries are trying to acquire more people to fill jobs, in their own countries. I mean, look at the war in Ukraine right now. A lot of people are pointing to the fact that Russia, with the world's largest landmass, what is it, over 6 million square miles, has basically half the US population. We're at 330 million, and I think Russia's at like 150. They aren't able to sustain what they have. So when you look at their invasion of Ukraine, it seems to be, wow, here's 48 million new people that are ethnically pretty much indistinguishable between purebred Russians. They're taking an opportunity to try to grow. This is what's caused by the population decline. The fertility rate used to be, I mean, sustainability is 2.1 replacement level. And now it's like 1.5. And so even in China, a nation with 1.5 billion people, you know how many babies were born there last year? Like 10 million. It's unbelievable. Was it 10 million or 100 million? But the point is a fraction of what's sustainable. And as the population ages, there's not going to be that support of the infrastructure of the youth, young, working to pay into the care for the youth or for the elderly. You're going to result now in euthanasia. I mean, this is a ticking time bomb with multiple facets to it that it's just going to cause so much more problems than just oh, we don't have enough people. It's going to lead to murders. It's going to lead to euthanasia. It's going to lead to war, and we were already seeing that. I think in the invasion of Ukraine, because they are critically concerned in Russia about their population. Very enlightening.
Yeah. It's always been stunning to me that these stats have been around for a long time. The coming population implosion has been known, and yet you have so many world leaders still banging the drum for population control.
Mm-hmm.
It beggars the imagination. In fact, the only thing that makes sense is that purposeful destruction, and that sounds crazy. Nonetheless, I can show you some. Canada has just gone crazy. Last week, we broke a story at LifeSite News. You'll remember about a year ago, we were dealing with this Canadian student. Shamefully, he was an evangelical student and went to a Catholic high school, publicly funded Catholic high school, mind you.
Mm-hmm.
And he advocated for women or girls to, have their own bathrooms, and boys shouldn't invade that, even if they
Are you
had
talking
themselves
Josh
transgender.
Alexander? Is that?
Yes, Josh
Yeah.
Alexander. That case was, made it around the world. We've got another one. This time, it's a Catholic and just turned 16-year-old, just like Josh was at the time. And this fella, his name is Malachi O'Kane. He's at a public non-Catholic school, and he wore a shirt with the words on it, "There are only two genders." Only two genders. It's not a big deal. In fact, because the school has LGBT posters all over the place, he
Yeah.
was wanting to express his own beliefs, which are grounded in biology, also in his faith. But he felt this was, what he was called to do. His mom, a mother of 5 kids, supported him because they're strong Catholics. Went to school, and he was suspended. He was suspended within half an hour. And interestingly, the school decides to suspend him for 6 days. It's really sad. End of the year. This is a big kid who is really good at sports. You miss out on track and field, which is, end of school year. Track and field day is always a thing that you look forward to as a young person. Anyway, canceled that on him. His brother went to school the next day, and in support of his older brother, he had, similar things, but he taped a little thing on his shirt that said, "There's only two genders." A few of the teachers ripped them off, but he had a few of them. Anyway, he too got suspended 4 days, and the mom went back. And we've been covering this all week at LifeSite. And a couple days ago on Monday, the suspension ended, and Malachi was back at school. Had a meeting with the teachers because the Friday before, we broke the story last week, and the day after we broke the story, half or more than half the teachers came to school with pride shirts.
Mm.
And so the mom went in with him, with Malachi, to say, talk to the principal, Carrie Moore, and say, "Hey, what's going on? We heard that half the teachers were in pride shirts last, on Friday." "Oh, yes, the teachers can wear whatever they want." "But wait, you just suspended my son." "Oh, that's totally different. That's hate."
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, "Hello? How about hate directed at us for our faith, for our biologically, based beliefs?" "No, that's totally different. We're going to have to disagree on that. And also, if your son comes to school with those shirts again or says anything about that, he'll be suspended."
Mm-hmm.
Unreal. Father, I'd love to hear your take on that.
Well, I remember that they asked Josh Alexander during, let's call it the interrogation, but he was asked if he would respect the authority of the new principal. There was a new principal there, Nickel or Nichols or something like that. And he said that, yes, I will respect the authority unless this principal's actions break my moral code. He then held up, if I remember, he held up the Bible and stated, this is the basis of my moral code. And so my, understanding of this whole case is what you just said a second ago, and that is, it seems tolerance is not universal. Tolerance only applies to what is deemed tolerable. And so if you have Christian teaching, which Judeo-Christian teaching is the foundation of our nation, this is not tolerated. And so when he held up the Bible and said, this is the basis of my moral code, where is somebody saying we have to respect somebody's conscience? It's universal. Even atheists teach that you must follow your conscience. Thomas Aquinas taught we must follow our conscience even if it's in error. And atheists will stick by that even though cultural relativism is one of the greatest evils of our time, they'll say, okay, you have your truth, I have my truth, as long as you follow your conscience. Okay, for the sake of argument, let's go with that atheistic premise. In that, you are basically saying that you have a truth that is Judeo-Christian truth, and then you have this secular truth, but only the secular truth is allowed, and therefore any other hate is, or any other truth is hate. And so I thought what he did by holding up the Bible saying this is the basis of my moral code is he was very in line with stating that I have a conscience that morally I am not only allowed to follow, but obligated to follow, as long as he doesn't break the civil law, of course, but he wasn't. And he made the point that when are you going to start to respect the students and their freedom of speech rather than persecute them? And so this is a classic example.
Yeah, it's stunning to me. It's almost like a secular religion because this is
Yes.
imposed with all of the force of uh, Islamic type of enforcement in Islamic countries with how they would enforce it. It's imposed. You're not allowed to dissent in any which way. And it's truly stunning. They're doing this on kids. This is
Yeah.
directed at a just turned 16-year-old and his younger siblings as well. Unbelievable. Frank, your take.
Yeah, and I remember Josh saying, will you continue to punish students for exercising their true beliefs, their religious freedoms? And he even added to it practicing chivalry, because he was doing that. And now not only did this case cause an uproar, but now we have this new case. So it doesn't seem like there's been any resolution in terms of tolerance of Christian values.
Indeed. Frank.
Well, you're free to agree. It's a simple exercise or demonstration of the danger to the current model of political power by any other means of explaining the world. This, I think, explains the consistent attack on Catholicism and Christian ideas, basically the idea of essentialism, which is that life has essential value, that nature has essential value, that creation has an essential order, and against the liberal ideology, which came out after the First World War, that basically reduces everything to words used by people in power to create meaning for those that they rule. So if you see a challenge to those definitions, you have to challenge that. Power has become so critical at the moment because it's been so successful in destroying its own legitimacy that it has to crack down on definitions to the point where any valid, or shall we say, competing explanation of the world must be delegitimized. And the way that you delegitimize it is you call it hate, or you criminalize it, or you make a display of people as if they're murderers for actually trying to prevent the murder of the unborn. And so what you do here is that you're effectively attacking a superior explanation of the world, one to your own. And you can see that this, I think that this explains why people are being victimized for their Christian and Catholic beliefs in public, not just in the United States and Canada, but across Europe as well.
Indeed.
Really to nominalism. This is the idea, the doctrine, if you will, that universals or general ideas are mere names without any reality. The fact that our teaching based on the reality of God's divine revelation, we're getting back into the heresy of this nominalism that, it's just a name, it's just corresponding, it has no corresponding reality. Properties, numbers, sets of thought are merely features of the way of considering things that exist. This is back to Occam, William of Occam. So we have to understand that the world has lost all sense of absolute moral truth. There is no such thing anymore. Cultural relativism has taken over, and don't give me your truth, I have my truth. What you say is good, I say is bad. There's no objective moral truth, and no society can maintain existence without a moral compass. And even back in the days of paganism, prior to the revelation of Jesus Christ, there at least, although albeit misguided, there was some kind of a moral absolute, even though it was messed up, it was directed in the wrong way, and many times they were striving for spiritualism, as off base, but they were striving for it. Now it's just complete atheism and no belief in any spiritual or moral truth whatsoever.
And what's stunning is you can't, in a way, they're right. If you want a society that is atheist or follows the values that you're hoping to, and you're pro-abortion and you are pro-LGBT XYZ and all of the things that Christ is against, then you're going to be alarmed by orthodoxy. You're going to be alarmed by conversions. And that's something that we also saw with Candace Owens coming into the church recently. We saw this also with Russell Brand praying the rosary, and then Russell Brand just was baptized. In fact, we have a little clip of his post-baptism thing that was just posted today. Let's watch his reaction to his own baptism. Watch this.
I'll be talking to you about my personal baptism this weekend. Isn't it extraordinary, any of you that have experienced this already, to get baptized? Do you feel like, how can this ceremony have any real import? How can the gentle, or actually in my case, quite radical immersion beneath water, and in my case, a live river, make any real difference? How can the sins of the past be washed away? How can you be born again? How can you awaken anew? I suppose to answer that question, you have to inquire in what you consider the self to be, whether you're made up just of impulses and urges and memories, or whether or not you believe there is a ghost in the machine, or more likely a Holy Spirit if you're willing to invite it into your life. I've reached a point in my life where for a long while, in fact, I've known that the material world was not enough. And more than that, as many of you are surely already mouthing, it's not even about you. This I've learned as an addict in recovery. The pursuit of my own goals and my own agenda always leaves me cold, and always leaves me empty, and always leaves me wanting more. You can never have enough of what you don't really want. For me, this is a new discovery. It is a surrender undertaken in gratitude and in sincerity. And I know that it's not something I'll be able to undertake perfectly, but for the first time in my life, I fully understand that I'm not at the center of my universe. And I say that as a parent. I've got 3 really, really beautiful kids I'm devoted to and dedicated to. But now I know that my function here is to be of service and to be guided, and to no longer be in autonomous or authoritative control of the measures and pursuits that are put before me.
It's funny. obviously not a Catholic baptism, but baptism nonetheless. And he certainly has some interesting thoughts there, Father. I'd love to hear your take.
Well, I know a lot of people are critical because it seemed to be timed with some of his accusations of sexual assault. Some people have come forward accusing him of sexual improprieties. And so others, critics are attacking that, saying that now he's just trying to look for a way out. But when you listen to what he says, it makes me think back to an interview that I did with a well-known exorcist, Father Lambert. He said, and here, Russell just mentioned about being filled with the Holy Spirit. What Father said was very intriguing as an exorcist. He said, a lot of people flock to exorcisms. They know the world is full of demons, and we are battling the spiritual warfare every day. And he says the exorcism of the evil is the easy part. He said evicting the demons is the easy part. He said, but what the hard part is what scripture tells us next. Why did the Bible say, but the spirit came back with 7 other demons worse than itself and took residence up into the person? And the reason that Father Lambert said that this happens is because once we get the evil out, once we get the demon out, which he would have with baptism, it was legitimate. I don't know if it's the Trinitarian formula or not. I don't know what kind of baptism, but yes, this will remove the demons. But then you have to fill your openness with God. If you don't fill that vacated spot, nature abhors a vacuum. And so if we just evict that evil from our soul, but we don't fill it with God, we are then more susceptible, as the scriptures tell us, of more demons coming back and filling us. And so we have to be very careful that we're doing it for the right reason. We hope he is. But then we continue making sure that we fill our vacancies, that we threw out the void of evil in our lives, which he had he admits he had a secular lifestyle and had definitely problems. But we have to fill that with God, or else we're going to be susceptible to being even worse off. The scripture tells us, after the fact. So I think it's an interesting story with Russell. I'm going to be interested to follow to see where it goes.
Indeed, and I hope he keeps praying there at Rosary. Frank, your take.
Well, I think Russell Brand, bless him, is on the right track. And also, I think his powerful message to the general public can't be overstated in its significance because, we kind of inhabit a mad cult of the self that promises in its consumer tantalizing an opportunity to live like celebrities. I mean, celebrities are used in advertisements, so you can dream of being them and try and emulate them and wear the clothes they wear and so on. So to have a celebrity who had every opportunity to indulge himself in basically the fantasies that drive consumerism in almost the minds of practically everyone who goes shopping, for him to come on the television and tell you it's not enough, it didn't satisfy me, I could have anything I wanted, and I did. I did indulge myself sexually with drugs, with purchases, with millions of dollars, and none of it filled up the hole inside myself. He makes a profound statement about the hollowness of the culture of substitution that is the consumer cult of the self. I think that's extremely significant, whether he manages to carry through his spiritual journey or not immediately. And I think it does look very promising for him because he appears to be sincere. I mean, apart from that, I would note about the allegations that had emerged about him, which were historic and did not seem to be very well substantiated at the time. They emerged precisely at the moment that Russell Brand stopped toying with political ideas and actually lent his support to Matt Taibbi's campaign against what he called the censorship industrial complex, which was the cooperation, long-standing, between United States and British intelligence services and the mainstream media and the major social media platforms. A similar thing happened to Julian Assange when he exposed this as well. And you'll remember that the then very serious rape allegations that were stressed against him were dropped because they turned out to be unsubstantiated. And I think that it was a remarkable coincidence that as soon as Russell Brand seemed to be sincere in his opposition towards what has now turned out to be, since the Twitter files, a determined attempt by the state to, again, suppress genuine information and replace it with lies, that's when we start to hear about these historic sexual accusations.
Very interesting. In other news this week, we had Pope Francis in an interview with CBS. And even though that's a bit older than a week, I wanted to bring it to you because of what else happened this week. First of all, let's take a look at what Pope Francis said about those who deny climate change.
What do you say to the deniers of climate change?
There are people who are foolish, and foolish even if you show them research. They don't believe it. Why? Because they don't understand the situation or because of their interest. But climate change exists.
Okay, and so this week we had a bishop follow up on what the Pope said. It was the Pope's name day on the Feast of St. George, and pro-LGBT Bishop John Stowe, that's so weird to say pro-LGBT bishop, but anyway, a heterodox bishop with regard to the teaching on the family in the church, John Stowe of Lexington, Kentucky, announced Tuesday that his diocese is pledging to reach net zero carbon emissions across 59 parishes by 2030. Let's give it a listen.
The history of the Catholic Diocese of Lexington adopting a 2030 sustainability commitment to be net zero within 5 years. Today, April 23rd, is the day after Earth Day, but it's also the Feast of St. George. That may not sound like it's anything important, except that Pope Francis's name was Jorge, or George, before he became Pope, and so it's a holiday in the Vatican. So this is our gift to Pope Francis on his name's day. On this day, we take this important step forward because our Holy Father, Pope Francis, has invited us to take seriously the encyclical, the teaching that he gave us back in 2015. Now, last fall, he issued another document called Laudate Deum, the praise of God, in which he took a little different tone. It was almost scolding in nature because not much has happened since 2015. And in fact, he points out that those who oppose the idea of working for the preservation of the planet, those who deny the reality of climate change, are having too much influence. And so he says, we're losing time. We have to begin to act.
Okay, so let me just start off with this. And it's why I really love LifeSite News. The reporters there do such a good job. If you look up the story of this bishop, John Stowe at LifeSite News, you will read the truth about climate change because it's not an accepted science, just to tell you that. The World Climate Declaration was signed by over 1,100 scientists and professionals. It was led by Professor Ivar Gaverf, a Norwegian physics Nobel Prize laureate. The signatories declared emphatically that there is no climate emergency, stressing a few key points: that Earth's climate has always experienced natural cooling and warming phases, that the climate policy relies on inadequate models, and that CO2 is plant food, the basis of all life on Earth, and that warming is far slower than predicted, and that climate policy must respect scientific and economic realities. They said, and I quote, "We strongly oppose the harmful and unrealistic net zero CO2 policy proposed for 2050. Go for adaptation instead of mitigation." In fact, the Greenpeace co-founder Patrick Moore was even stronger in his condemnation. He warned last year that a global achievement of net zero carbon emissions would lead to, quote, "at least 50% of the population dying." Campaign Life Coalition, a pro-life group in Canada, has also warned that cries of an impending climate catastrophe disguises a depopulation agenda, since globalists have signaled that they view overpopulation and even each new baby born as an environmental burden upon the planet. I'd love to hear your take on it, Father.
Well, the most accurate measures of temperature that we have come from satellites. And since we began, I did a symposium on this a few months ago. Since they began taking these measurements back in 1979, they actually show very minor fluctuations And quote from the synopsis, insignificant net change in global temperature. So is the Earth getting warmer? I don't know, but who's to determine the right amount of global heat? And then the question is, even if it is getting warmer, is it due to natural causes, obviously, or man-made? Now, here's what I thought was most interesting in the symposium that I did was most of the greenhouse effect is due to water vapor. So why isn't the EPA designating H2O as a harmful pollutant that has to be regulated? And so, I just laugh at the politicalness of this. My whole argument I come from a blue collar town of Detroit, manufacturing. I worked in the auto industry. We are going to destroy our auto industry in the name of internal combustion engine. I'll have to go by way of the dinosaur. First of all, to go all electronic, which, by the way, China controls everything almost in the manufacture of electronic vehicles and the batteries. But the manufacturing and disposal of electric batteries is the most detrimental environmental hazard that we have. And if you go back to even clean coal technology down in West Virginia and Pennsylvania, for every clean coal plant that we closed, China and India are opening up 2 dirty ones. So if we pull out of the clean coal technology, it creates more of a, again, going back to the vacuum, it creates more of an opportunity for China and India to create dirty producing coal plants. We are so backwards and illogical on our response to this that we're not even realizing that in misguided effort to improve, and CO2 is needed for the world, as you said, it's plant food. But in this misguided attempt to do better, we're just opening the door to China to environmentally destroy the world. And nobody's saying this. I'm shocked. I think a couple of the senators, Vivek and Nikki Haley, brought it up, but they were mocked. It's really unbelievable, the political aspect of this.
Indeed. Frank, your take.
Well, perhaps if the Holy See were more interested in affirming and celebrating Catholic virtues, it wouldn't spend so much of its time virtue signalling with rainbow flags and windmills. But that's by the by, I suppose. If you want to test the claims of whether it's apocalyptic to pursue the kind of net zero agenda, you can already see what's happening in reality in Germany. I mean, its heads of industry and its politicians now agree that it has an insoluble economic crisis, that its industry is in an unrecoverable decline, that they may have to stop manufacturing cars. This has a knock-on effect for the rest of the European Union. Germany was not just the economic and industrial powerhouse, it's the paymaster of the entire European order. And without that, without German money, there is no EU. There is no way to subsidize the many satellite nations of it and to maintain the cohesion of that society. You can see that not only do the Chinese produce 80% of things like solar panels and so on, they dominate this market through production. It's also widely acknowledged now that adopting these net zero policies is simply a way of committing national economic suicide and handing an advantage to people who aren't similarly insane. And that there really isn't any other way to view that, is to say, well, look, we will destroy our own industry and you can carry on supplying us with your things. What we're doing is buying these things from abroad cheaper and so on. But because we are destroying our own industrial base, we are basically vacating our seat at the table in future. I mean, if we continue to do this, not only will society be unsustainable, why would anybody listen to us if we don't have any economic power or any economic clout, or indeed any reason to be listened to, because we've gone mad? I mean, in Britain alone, the electricity burden means that the lights will go out within 10 years. If we continue to pursue these net zero policies, electricity demand will surge in line with the transition to electric cars and so on. But with an absence of future gas-powered generation, we'll see sustained and increasingly severe power cuts, meaning that these predictions of collapse, they're not raw scaremongering apocalypticism. These things are readily measured by the fact that you don't have the capacity. In fact, you're destroying your own capacity to sustain society, and you're calling it not just virtuous, but an urgent necessity. We don't just have to commit suicide, but we have to do it extremely quickly.
Unbelievable. In fact, Jordan Peterson had very much the same take as you did. Let's listen.
Why the hell do you think they're so concerned with saving the planet, which Pope Francis seems to be on about constantly, when he should be saving souls? That's how you save the planet, not by worshipping Gaia.
Do you think Pope Francis puts the emphasis in the wrong places sometimes?
Well, I gave you that example. I don't see, for the life of me, what the Catholic Church has to do with the climate crisis.
Indeed. So a few items from the crazy bag before we get to some good news before we leave you. We always try and leave you with some good news. But in Germany, in Speyer, Germany, at the cathedral, you had this last week. It was it's a bit earlier than last week, but you had a gathering of women who want to promote female deacons on February 29th, actually. They had one of these meetings where they had the Central Committee of German Catholics, a prominent lay group, hosted the Liturgy of the Word in the Diocese of Speyer in the context of the nationwide Day of the Deaconesses. We've heard this is being proposed, Father, especially for the upcoming synod. What's your take on that and the move in that direction?
Well, I think the first thing the church should do is explain what church teaching is. Back in the Bible, we have diaconesses, but it was totally a different capacity. It was not serving at the altar. It was not a clerical position. It was assisting women in the roles that they would serve in the church. A completely different understanding of the way it's being applied here today. You cannot have an ordained woman to a clerical state. And so I wish the church would first clarify, what do we mean by deacon? Because this is, I think, causing the first bit of confusion. But she cannot be a clerical member of the church serving at the altar. This is just, it's not possible. Even Pope John Paul II said that, I can't change this. This is beyond my authority when it came to women's ordination. I mean, even married priest is a matter of discipline and can be debated and changed, but women's ordination to the clerical state cannot. It as John Paul said, the church does not have that authority. And when the priest is at the altar, he's giving that seed. And that seed that life coming from the altar is received by the church, who is feminine. And she receives that, and that's why the priest is a male. And in giving that life-giving seed from the altar, if you had a woman in the clerical state, especially the priesthood, sorry for my crudeness, but you have lesbianism, because you can't have a woman giving that life-giving seed to be received by another woman to generate that life. That is how God created male and female. And so we just need to go back to defining the basics here of man, woman, and the role are complementary but different. And I seem to feel we've not done that in any sense of the word.
If you look up the story at LifeSite News from this week, you'll see that the women's gathering included a clown dance.
Of course, it's so far, so Germany. I mean, we have to hand it to the Germans. Their attempt to replace the Catholic faith and its liturgy with a form of a cringe-inducing experimental theatre is unsurpassed by any other nation. You have to give them 10 out of 10 for that. Well done, Germany. I didn't think you could go any further down the path of Weimarization since last week, but you have. You've managed to outdo yourselves. I mean, it really is beyond satire. But you have to look at this in the sense that it really is a sense, I think, of personalizing everything. the religion and the observation of it, and indeed its essence, is no longer about God or about the Catholic faith or about any of that. You know, it's about me and about how I can insert myself and my obsessions into it, and how I can make it about me. And what better way to make it about me, like, you know, in the modern and indeed idiomatic German sense, than to actually don a pair of clown shoes and a red nose whilst you are in church? I think it speaks for itself. It's
Indeed. And here's something that I wish were satire, but is not. LifeSite News got it confirmed from the Vatican that they are indeed renewing their secret deal with China that is going to be renewed in in the fall. And Michael Haynes, Rome correspondent, got that officially from Cardinal Parolin. Um, this is stunning because of how horrific that deal has been for Catholics in China. And I know you just finished Steve Mosher's book on China. If you can give us that, please.
Well, Stephen Mosher's book, The Devil in Communist China, is an excellent account, a very sobering and disturbing account of the history of communist China. And in its later chapters, it goes into some detail about what's happened to the Catholic Church under the Chinese communist regime. And of course, it's been driven underground, and it's being replaced by a kind of nominally Catholic Church that is completely in sympathy with the communist doctrine. And unfortunately, Mosher's book does a very good fist of summarizing how the Vatican's mission to China was in fact led by the disgraced, as Moshe describes him, both sexually and financially corrupted McCarrick. And Moshe concludes that this is why the deal for the Catholic Church in China was so terrible, because it was authored by such a terrible man. And what it's resulted in is, as you pointed out, John Henry, earlier on, the identification of faithful Catholics to a hostile communist regime, which has now succeeded in driving them underground or persecuting them further and replacing them with a kind of ape of the church, which is the kind of official popular church that is sanctioned by